experts from this weekend. It's hard to choose who to invite because they all have such good stuff to talk about. But I wanted to have a conversation about the future of autonomic research. Where do we think we're headed? And so we invited Dr. Stephen Vernino, who is a neurology professor at UT Southwestern and runs an autonomic lab and is a leading expert in autoimmune neurology. Dr. Laura Pace, who's a neurogastroenterologist from University of Utah, and gave us a great presentation not that long ago on some POTS EDS mast cell genetics research she's doing, and Dr. Mitch Miglis, who is an autonomic neurologist at the Stanford Autonomic Lab. And actually, I think Dr. Miglis writes a column for one of the autonomic journals on sort of the up and coming stuff that's been happening. So it's a great panel. If you can all turn your mics on, see your cameras. So welcome, guys. I think, Kirsten, are we good? Everyone can see all four of us?
All four of you on the screen.
Sort of looking like the Brady Bunch right now, the four of us on the screen. So maybe let's go around, and I would love, not to put you on the spot, but I would love to hear your sort of top three, what you think are the big picture things that we're going to see in the next few years in autonomic research. So I'm going to ask Dr. Miglis first. No pressure.
So, sure. Well, I think, obviously we're all interested in POTS. I think most patients listening have that diagnosis. I think one of my top three wishes would be for us to be able to better phenotype POTS and to create sort of more well-defined cohorts to study. So I think that's a big priority. And what outcome measures, perhaps number two, what outcome measures should we use in these studies? What biomarkers should we use? Because the heart rate is probably not a great biomarker. We need better ones. And then number three, I think understanding what this autoimmunity means in POTS it would be my third.
Sounds good. Dr. Pace, what are your thoughts? And it could be about POTS, but it could be about broader autonomic research.
Yeah, so I really would like to see us sort of reframe how we even think about sort of autonomic nervous system disorders and really start to integrate some of the information from other components of organ systems that are innervated by the autonomic nervous system and start to really include that in the diagnostic evaluation for patients, because still at this point, the vast majority of testing that we're doing really is just showing that there's an abnormality, but not getting at the underlying pathophysiology of it. So I'd really like to see the integration of more pathophysiology and I think more genetics, because we are seeing this run in families. And I do think that there probably is a signal there somewhere if we use the right tools to look at it.
What are your thoughts, Dr. Vernino?
Well, thanks. I think the other two sort of hit the highlights, and as we're kind of preparing our discussion of what the NIH needs to do, it really speaks to what we need to do as a group to advance the field. I think one is to really as doctors to get our act together in terms of educating our own, making sure that we heard that in the last session, that we are having more, at least at our medical school, there's one single lecture on the autonomic nervous system for medical students. And that's probably one more lecture than a lot of medical students have. And that we need to think about working together as in consortia. The people that are part of this group in terms of physicians need to work together and really understand, as Mitch said, some sort of defined outcome measures and phenotyping of patients that we all can agree to use and speak the same language. Otherwise, we're doing lots of different research that is hard to synergize together and make progress. And I think what we heard about in the fireside talk is that we need to be advocates for our patients, or also partners. And then just to add an observation, I think that this is a place where patients can really be helpful, like we just heard about, in terms of making it easy to be partners with them. I think sometimes patients come and overwhelm their doctors, and so I think we do a better job if we can find colleagues of our own. As a neurologist, I think I'm very lucky to have a cardiologist and a gastroenterologist and an immunologist and other people that I can talk to or refer patients to. And I think we need to start to develop those kinds of centers where we have all those pieces as Dr. Pace was talking about. It's hard to do, hard to keep it together, but really that's the only way that we as doctors can survive in trying to deliver good care for patients.
Yeah. In terms of, trying to get your colleagues at, if you're at a university, or even if you're not at a university, if you're a local primary care doctor, how to getting clinicians to loop their colleagues into this and, take on a piece of it and be interested. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Chung at Hopkins. So he is actually one of the newer autonomic labs in the US, right? And he has started this weekly POTS meeting for clinicians at his hospital. And he's got tons of people tuning in. I lectured for them. I know Dr. Pace is lecturing for them soon. I think Dr. Goldstein is lecturing for them next week. And he's got this group of doctors, and not just doctors, research coordinators, nurses, people who are involved in different pieces of research, learning all about POTS and the different pieces of it, so that they can become really good researchers. And they're already doing some really good research there, but I'm excited about it because I think this is a model I'd like to see other academic centers take on, where they build this interdisciplinary team that has regular meetings, that tries to figure out, literally just sits around and tries to figure out POTS and how we're going to study this, how we're going to care for these patients the best way we can. So I think we need that. There's a handful of big autonomic labs now, but we absolutely need more than we have. And not just for clinical care, but for research, right? We need more researchers in this field. I know all of you as researchers are also busy clinicians. You might have educator roles. So I sometimes feel bad for the doctors that are in this field, because all of this is put on you. You have to care for these complicated patients. You have to do this research. You have to teach your colleagues, and it's like, it's not enough of you to handle this massive amount of work that we have to do. So I think Dr. Miglis's point on the heart rate criteria is actually, it's controversial, but I think that's probably true. I don't think it's the best diagnostic criteria. It's better than having no criteria. I think that criteria was created for a reason when it was, but I'm hoping that we can move to the point where we're diagnosing POTS based on more specific biomarkers, because clearly there's people with orthostatic intolerance who don't meet the POTS heart rate criteria, who might have like the same physiological problem going on as a POTS patient. So why are we're distinguishing that as if it's two different diagnoses, and maybe it isn't.
I'll tell you that, we, as I think the group knows, we're doing an IVIG study, a double-blind placebo-controlled trial for POTS. And one of the challenges we see patients who really look for all the world like they have an autoimmune form of POTS, and they have antibodies. They look like a great study patient, and you stand them up and they have a heart rate increase of 25. And it's very frustrating. So it's a challenge to know someone that, the patient's obviously like, well, let me try again, that kind of thing. Let
me get dehydrated.
Yeah, let me go away and run around and heat a little bit. So it's challenging. I feel bad for patients, and doing research is hard. You have to come up with some criteria. So I completely agree. We need, it'd be great if we had a biomarker. I'm not sure that the antibodies are going to be the ultimate one, but there'll be, or maybe different types of POTS will have different types of biomarkers that we need to advance.
So what do you think outside of POTS, other autonomic disorders? I know that Dr. Miglis and Dr. Reno I think you've both been involved in some, or your labs have been involved in some MSA research or AAG research. What do we have to look forward to in the next few years on the non-POTS autonomic disorders?
I can address that first, perhaps. What's interesting is that there's a group of degenerative disorders that are related to this buildup of protein alpha-synuclein in the nerve cells. And for whatever reason, I don't think we really understand, alpha-synuclein likes to get into autonomic neurons and cause problems there. It's the same protein that builds up in neurons that cause Parkinson's disease and multiple system atrophy and pure autonomic failure, and even a disorder called dementia with Lewy bodies. Mm-hmm. So drug companies obviously are very interested in targeting this alpha-synuclein protein. And because MSA and the autonomic disorder that goes along with it tend to be the most rapidly progressive one, fortunately or unfortunately, that's been the target for a couple of upcoming studies looking at drugs that interfere with this alpha-synuclein protein. So our MSA patients who previously are currently have no treatment to change the course of their disease will now at least have some research studies going on.
Yeah.
And I'll just add to that. I think in terms of the alpha-synucleinopathies, big word, but these neurodegenerative disorders, we're realizing the holy grail is diagnosing them before they're even obvious, in what we call the prodromal phase, or the very early phase. And this is part of my bias as a sleep doctor, but we can find out a lot from a person's sleep on what disease they might get in the future. And we're doing things like even skin biopsy now, where we can look at patients that just have REM sleep behavior disorder and find the alpha-synuclein in their skin. And now the next goal is going to see can we determine the type of synucleinopathy they're going to get. What biomarkers can we use to say someone's going to develop PD, MSA, or DLB 20 or 30 years from now. And I think that's going to be a big thing we're going to see in the future.
I had a conversation with Dr. Todd Levine, who does some of the alpha-synuclein skin biopsy testing that's recently come out, and about whether we could set up some kind of registry to screen older dysautonomia patients who don't necessarily have an MSA, Parkinson's, or PAF diagnosis right now. But if you're age 50 and up, or we'd have to determine the age, but do we want to screen those patients for that biomarker to see if there might be people given sort of a generic dysautonomia diagnosis who might have this problem going on? It's just not being recognized because maybe they haven't gotten to a big expert who knows how to recognize these conditions. I think that's an area where Dysautonomia International could be helpful, because we have large audiences of patients that we could direct to, different research centers to enroll in things. So what do you think in terms of genetics? We're sort of in Pot's world, we're like just starting to tap into genetic research. It's been happening for 30 years without us. So, Dr. Pace has done some of the work on this. Where do you think we're going with Pot's related genetic research?
I think we just need to start doing more of it. And I think that instead of being like genome-wide association studies, that we really start to use whole genome sequencing, especially when we are identifying patients that have multiple affected family members, because that is a really powerful technique that allows us to just focus on the areas of the genome that all the affected family members share. And so then we are not looking at the whole genome, but now we're looking at a subset of it. And then we can start to really narrow in some of the potential targets. The other thing that whole genome sequencing allows us to do is it actually allows us to look at non-coding regions, because some of the non-coding regions are actually really important for like gene function and things like that. And so the technology's here. It's actually not that expensive anymore. The tools to analyze these types of data sets are here. I mean, it's something I've been working on through the NIH Undiagnosed Diseases Network to apply this to rare diseases, but we can do the same for dysautonomia. And I really think that, and the work that I talked about with like even doing the next step for screening with like animal models, that's also become cheaper, easier. It's really fast to screen now. So I think it's time.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Dr. Miglis. So, we've been sharing a lot of information on our social media pages about long haul COVID or post-COVID syndrome, whatever it ends up eventually being called. But this phenomenon of a subset of people with COVID developing something that looks like a chronic dysautonomia. And you have taken an interest in researching this. Do you think that given all the academic research interest in COVID, that this helps us not only understand what's going on in COVID patients, but also what's happened to other post-viral dysautonomia patients? Do you think there's a lesson to be learned?
Yeah, and thanks for asking that question. I mean, that's really why I became interested in that topic. I wasn't particularly interested in COVID per se. I really would prefer to avoid, the the doom and gloom of the news, but I think we all started seeing patients coming in that were just previously completely healthy, and they had POTS. I mean, they're the classic patient that we're used to seeing with POTS. And so, I think, I realized, and probably everyone else realized, that this may be the first time that we have not only a major infection, a huge pandemic, but you have the known virus, you know what it is, and you know when patients are infected. And we usually can't say that with disease. So hopefully this will help us understand some of these autoimmune mechanisms in POTS. And yeah, it's definitely bidirectional.
Yeah. I wanted to mention for our listeners, we're going to take some Q&A starting in like 15 minutes. Do the end of the session as Q&A. So if you have questions about research, that's the theme of the conversation, feel free to type into the Q&A and we will try to get to some of your questions. Although we're now up to 676 questions still sitting in the Q&A that we haven't gotten to today. So I apologize in advance if we don't get to all the questions. But so what do you think about, so putting ourselves at some point in the future, we have some better understanding of immune function in POTS, and maybe there's a subset of these patients who we say this is an autoimmune condition. How long do you think it takes before that's figured out in the research literature to the point where it actually gets implemented into clinical practice? Because this is something I worry about. Even if we had the cure today, there's still so many patients who can't even get diagnosed, aren't being taken seriously, aren't, even being offered any medications at all. So how do we, what is the normal trickle down rate for new medical knowledge, especially in conditions that people aren't terribly interested in we're not cancer or stroke, right? So how do we get other clinicians to be into this? It's a lot of questions in one, sorry. Dr. Bernino, take it away.
I think one reason, in some ways, jumping to a treatment trial for autoimmune POTS, you could consider to be somewhat premature, because we have these various antibodies, and we don't know if, as you saw the questions, don't know if they're cause or effect. Maybe these are good antibodies doing something and they are a biomarker of some other thing. But I think at some point, you have to have some scientific data. We have lots of case reports and case series that IVIG is good and this is good and that is good. But until you have sort of some trial or other piece of solid data that really demonstrates an effect, I think to go through the process of taking these antibodies that we've heard about, going through the process of developing animal models and looking at pathophysiology in animals and then trying to replicate that in humans, that's probably a 10 or 15 year proposition. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to jump forward a bit, realizing that we don't fully understand the disease, and yet we're going to try to treat it anyway. And that's why I tell patients a lot. We heard about the concept of saying, I don't know. We do that a lot. Perhaps neurologists are in a particularly good position to do that because we don't know about a lot of things. But to be able to say, I'm not really sure, we're going to partner together to try to figure this out. And we may need some patience, we may need some trial and error, and we'll try to get there. But then, once we have a treatment that looks to be promising, to really get a scientific piece of data that supports it, I think is going to be a good starting point. So maybe shortcutting a little bit, but that's okay, I think.
Yeah. I think if you look back at the history of other autoimmune diseases and how they were figured out, all of them went through this phase of nobody really knows what this is. Then there was a next phase of maybe this is autoimmune. And then there was, okay, now there's broad brush autoimmune treatments like IVIG or steroids. And then eventually someone figured out molecular mechanisms that could have a drug target. And so I think what you're doing is, trying to find looking to see if the broad brush works as at the same time trying to find, are there specific targets that are going on in these patients? And I think we've just started to do that. I think it's, important for people to know Dysautonomia International, we're well aware that these antibodies that we've been funding research on might not be the thing. They might be just part of a bigger picture that needs to be figured out. So I see that your mics are on mute. I don't know, but you'll disappear off the screen when you're on mute. So.
Oh, okay, sorry.
so
the background noise.
what do you think we can do to get more researchers into the field?
Well, I think that one of the thoughts we had in terms of just, you know, your approach of going to Congress and NIH is that ultimately, you know, optimistically, we might imagine in the next few years having an RFA, which is a request for applications from the NIH, saying, you know, we have some money that we want to give to POTS research. Here's a request, and that's a signal to researchers that instead of just putting your research grant in a big pot of thousands of applications, if you're targeting one of these areas, that, you know, your chances of funding are better, and chances of funding will drive research for sure. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. And I think, you know, again, having some successes with really solid research is going to be helpful. You know, one struggle we have is we welcome all researchers, but you know, not all research is good research, and we got to be careful not to let you know, to really be critical about the research, even though we'd like to believe everything we see, to confirm it, and then I think we'll be in a better position to move forward with more and more researchers getting into the field.
Yeah. I was going to ask, you know, Dr. Pace and Dr. Miglis, what made you take an interest in this? You're on the younger side of the spectrum. No offense to Dr. Fernino, but, you know, what made you go into this? It's not like there was someone in medical school saying you should do this weird condition that no one's ever heard of as your thing. You know, how did you get into it? Because I try to ask a lot of experts that, and then, you know, how can we get that inspiration given to some other young researchers?
As I said in my talk, I met a very convincing South African with great hair at Harvard named Roy Freeman, and I had no plans whatsoever to go into autonomic medicine. I always wanted to do sleep, but you know, I was actually applying for epilepsy fellowships as well as an overlap neurophysiology. But he made a very convincing, you know, gave a very convincing description of how fascinating a field, and I realized right away it's a big niche. I mean, there's very few of us that do this, so that has many appealing aspects, and the future is open, and there's lots of, I realized, interaction with all of the other specialties, you know, including sleep, GI, every other subspecialty interacts with autonomic, you know, medicine. So it's dynamic. I mean, you're never going to get bored in this specialty.
Mm. And for me, I just was seeing these patients that had all these symptoms, and what my training told me was I was supposed to diagnose them with a functional disorder and then just be like, oh, good luck with that. And it's not the right thing to do. There had to be a mechanism. And so that's when I started to sort of go down this rabbit hole. And then just to sort of go back to your other question, Lauren, about how do we get more researchers kind of in this space? And I think one of the options is actually to do sort of a reverse granting mechanism. So if someone's actually working on sort of like a technology or a methodology that we think might be applicable to how we want to answer some of these questions, is we go to them with money and say, this is what we want you to do. And I think that there are a lot of really amazing scientists in the basic science space that just don't know about this disorder. And so they don't even know that their technologies and things like that could be applicable. And so, I mean, there's just the space is wide open.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the questions coming in, and there's a lot of them. So we have a question. Can the panelists comment on research that might be happening or should be happening on the role of neurotransmitters such as NOCO and H2S, which I think hydrogen sulfide, is that what that is? I don't know, I'm getting my chemicals wrong. But, you know, talking about, is there research going on in, I guess, in general or in the dysautonomia space on different neurotransmitters and how they might affect gut motility?
Oh, there is research in that space, and also with the interaction with sort of the microbiome functions, but there's a lot more that we can be doing. I mean, especially in like animal models and things like that, using optogenetics, or even the designer receptor engineered for designer drugs to actually interrogate specific neurons and things like that, and actually look at their functionality. I mean, there's so much to be done here.
This is a question for Dr. Miglas. Has anyone done any POTS research, POTS sleep-related research, in particular, anything on POTS and narcolepsy that you know of?
Sorry, I tried to type the answer to that as well. I don't know, I guess it didn't go through. There's a lot of research on heart rate in narcolepsy, on autonomic dysfunction in narcolepsy. And it's controversial. Some groups have found increased sympathetic tone, and some groups have found increased parasympathetic tone. I think most of the research supports increased sympathetic tone because the actual, the neurons that are lost in narcolepsy, the hypocretin neurons that are important for being awake, they stimulate the sympathetic system, actually inhibit it a bit. So there's, when the patients sleep, their heart rates are generally higher. And there's no literature on POTS and narcolepsy. We published one case report, but I think that's far from the norm. I think most patients can have elevated heart rates all the time, but generally they're not excessive and they don't increase, usually when patients stand up.
I definitely think, sleep quality, and you know this because this is your specialty, but I see this as a patient myself. If I don't get good sleep, I am so much more symptomatic the next day, even if I'm doing all my other management stuff. And so I would emphasize to our patient community, if you can't get good sleep for whatever reason, try to find a sleep specialist, because even if they don't know about POTS, they know how to help you sleep better.
And generally, most patients with POTS, I think, have the opposite. They have insomnia. They have trouble sleeping. But thinking about that question more, I will say that I don't think there's a subset of patients that may have narcolepsy with POTS. But I have noticed there's a condition called idiopathic hypersomnia, which is like narcolepsy, but it's not the classic, form of narcolepsy. I often refer to it as the POTS of sleep medicine, because it's idiopathic. We don't understand what it is. Patients are often discounted, as having anxiety or depression. Patients can sleep a really long time, but when you measure their sleep, they sleep very well. Sometimes you can't wake them up and they can sleep 14, 16 hours a day. So I have noticed there is a percentage of POTS with that phenotype. And actually we published on this, looking at just patients with that diagnosis, giving them autonomic surveys like the Compass, and finding that those patients had a very high percentage of autonomic symptoms. And a lot of them were diagnosed with POTS, and they had allergic symptoms like mast cell. So I think it goes back to, what patients are diagnosed with may depend on sort of how they enter into the medical system, what doctors they see primarily, and that sort of shapes their treatment.
Yeah. What do you, I want to go around again and ask all three the same question. What do you think Dysautonomia International can do to help advance, let's focus specifically on POTS, because that's what most of our research funding has been for. So what do you think that we can do as an organization to advance the field of POTS research more than we're already trying to?
Well, I'll start by saying I think your group does a great job in terms of awareness and advocacy, and I think there's still work for us to be done on the medical side to get the word out. But we definitely appreciate what you do. Just as I was thinking, I think one thing that you might be able to do is, kind of help your group, because you reach a lot of people, to really understand, what it means to be part of research. I think a lot of people sort of think that's a great thing, but then realize it's a big commitment to be part of a research trial. And I think that, that might be a little primer on how to be a good research patient, might be in addition to telling people where the research is happening.
What about Dr. Pace? What are your thoughts?
Well, I again want to echo that I think you are doing an amazing job with funding research and prioritizing research topics. And I think one of the things that your organization also does is actually brings all of us together normally in person, so that we can sort of discuss sort of how we're thinking about this and what we think are research priorities, and get ideas from each other. And I think that at a lot of our institutions, we don't have the colleagues right there. And so a lot of this is done, you know, either through email or phone calls. And it's just, it's really, like, I think encourages creative thinking when we're all together as a group and can sort of talk about things.
Mm.
Yeah, I echo all of that. I mean, I think for research, obviously we need more funding. And I think that in the future going forward, it may not all come from, you know, the government, probably not. And so I think looking at, you know, private donors, you know, philanthropy gifts, if they're, I don't know how well that interfaces with nonprofit organization, but finding ways to get, you know, more funding that way, which is faster funding available would be great.
Well, if anyone's feeling the urge to donate, go to curepots.org. There's a big donate button right now. I feel like, you know, the PBS shows where they do like the free television, but they hit you up for a donation like every hour. So what Dr. Pace said about bringing the researchers together. So that's probably my favorite part of the conference every year is, I mean, I love seeing all my dysautonomia friends and, you know, like all these volunteers that work together remotely all year long. But I think it's so critically important to bring the researchers into the same actual room and have them know each other. Because when we first started doing this, I won't say names, but there were some very well-known people in the field who didn't know each other. And I was like, what do you mean you don't know each other? I just assumed you're all friends, you know? But it is a small field and it's also a little fragmented. Some people are in neurology, some people are electrophysiologists, some people are in sleep medicine, some people are GI doctors. And not everyone is super networked in with the professional societies for doctors, which is the American Autonomic Society, which all three of you have been involved in. So I love bringing the doctors together to talk and trade notes. But part of that is having to build, getting the people in that room to trust each other and to be willing to discuss their ideas. Because research is, at the end of the day, it's a little bit of a competitive business. And people, not everyone, but some people are naturally not going to share their ideas because they don't want someone to steal their good research idea. So I struggle with that. And I will have doctors tell me ideas because they want us to fund it, but they won't talk to anyone else about it. So how do I convince your colleagues, of course, not you guys, but your colleagues, to be more forthright with each other and feel more collegial and confident in having, you know, closed door discussions to move the research forward?
Well, I agree with Laura. I think that this is one of those venues that this and the AAS meeting are one of those venues that support that idea. And I think actually, you didn't ask me, but one of the reasons I was attracted to the autonomic field is that, you know, I think, like Mitch said, you know, some of the personalities were very interesting, but also, you know, there was definitely this idea that, you know, this is a collegial group in general. I mean, people have really fixed ideas, but they're willing to talk about them in general, as opposed to some of the other basic science research I did, where there really was a very territorial kind of idea about things. So in general, we've been, you know, pretty lucky with colleagues who are willing to share things, willing to, in my case, accept samples and pass them back and forth to have people try out different things on them as we try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Well, how do you think, I mean, what would be your advice to patients who want to enroll in a research trial? Because we get patients all the time who contact us and, you know, there are not a lot of trials going on in dysautonomia just because there aren't a lot of centers that do it. There isn't a lot of funding. So the trials are not too many. So they fill up quick. Like, for example, the Ivig trial, we had several people ask us today, how do I get into that trial? And I told them, you know, I don't think you're recruiting because you have more POTS patients than you know what to do with.
Well, actually, if anyone's still interested, we are recruiting still. We're only about halfway there. The challenge is that you know, IVIG in POTS. I don't know if you talked about this during the conference. You can't just, you know, sort of come in one day and get a big blast of IVIG and go on your way. Most patients don't tolerate that, and IVIG doesn't work that way. So this is a long trial. It takes, you know, 12 weeks of coming in almost weekly. And so if you don't live around Dallas, that's not really that practical. So we do have the logistical things. Now we have patients who've come from Oklahoma and southern parts of Texas who make the commitment. So I think if you know, whenever you want to, in any research trial, really understand what it is you're getting into. The last thing we want, and we've had this problem in our trial, is people are very excited and they want to be in the trial and they realize, boy, this is hard. And, you know, we've had some dropouts for logistical reasons, which is not something you really don't want in your research trial.
Especially with such an expensive drug too. It's hard to replace that once you've already given it to someone. Is there any contact info you can share with people who want to volunteer? I mean, you're going to get like 500 people volunteering, but
That's fine. My email is pretty public. You can get it on the UT Southwestern website, but it's just stephen.vernino@utsouthwestern.edu. That's perfectly fine. But and you know, I have a very good research coordinator, and we can, you know, get the information to people. But you know, one challenge is, you know, when you do a research study is we're trying to find a good result. So you have to use what's called inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria to try to limit your group to people that really are good candidates. And that always makes us, you know, although POTS is very common, there's lots of patients, being eligible for a trial is different than being someone who might benefit from the drug. So, you know, I guess people should be aware of that, be patient, and also recognize that these things take time and not everyone will be eligible either for logistical reasons or for the inclusion criteria.
So I have a question for Dr. Pace, because you've worked with sort of the study that we funded for you was a multi-diagnosis study. You know, what do you think we can do to get clinicians who are not currently in this field, who are experienced clinicians, who maybe have special expertise in different pieces of what we see in this patient population? You know, how do you think we can recruit experts, or not even if to become researchers, but just to even kind of trade notes like the inside POTS researchers are doing? Like, for example, we have a very good relationship with Dr. Frank Amano, and, you know, she interacts with the autonomic experts, but, you know, there's like no Sjogren's researchers that are talking to the autonomic docs, right? And there's no, I would say no, but it's not a lot of communication. And then, you know, people in the GI world, like you're one of the only GI docs I know that has a real interest in this. So how do we get more people from outside of autonomic land to take an interest?
It's actually been tough in some ways and easy in others. And so what I found when I was building sort of my kind of coalition at the University of Utah was just taking the time to sit down and talk to people about sort of some of the physiology of these disorders, actually introducing them sometimes for the first time to the autonomic nervous system, and sort of explaining how these are complex disorders that can't be managed in silos. I found that sometimes introducing them to patients, you know, pulls at their heartstrings and things like that. But I think one of the major barriers is that there's such a stigma associated with this diagnosis that people don't want to be thought to be working on it, because then they're going to be grouped into kind of like quacks or something. And so I think education, and you know, I think it's amazing that UT Southwestern actually has at least one class that talks about the autonomic nervous system, because it's better than most places. And you
One
know,
lecture, not a class.
Oh, one lecture. Okay, well, still, you know, and even like coming through, you know, fellowship training for gastroenterology and actually doing specialized training in neurogastroenterology, still we're not getting trained in the autonomic nervous system like we should be. And so there are just huge educational deficits.
I sat in on the 145-minute lecture at Stony Brook's medical school. That was basically an anatomy and physiology lecture that like a college kid could have understood, on just here's the autonomic parts and this is what they do. And there was like nothing on what happens when those parts don't work right. So I was invited to the lecture intentionally because they knew it was, you know, something that they probably should improve upon for future years. And so they let me go in the next day, the next course session, and give a lecture on autonomic disorders. And it was kind of, that was actually before I had the professorship, and that's what led to it. Because, you know, even it's a great medical school, and they don't have anyone there that does this. Who's going to teach it if you don't have anyone there that really knows it? So again, putting the burden on our limited number of autonomic experts to train some more doctors. that's, that's something we've talked about doing as an organization, is supporting fellowships, because there's only a handful of fellowships in the country that really are focused on autonomic disorders. And, we need more people, we need more experts. So let me take some more from the Q&A in here. Has there been any research on POTS and seizure disorders or epilepsy that you know of? I would say no, I don't know of any, but I was wondering if any of you did.
No, I mean, there's research on in patients with epilepsy that that have we call SUDEP that have,
Your volume sounds very low. Can you?
Oh, okay. Is that better? Yep. Okay. Let's take the mic. So yeah, there's literature on patients that actually die from epilepsy, unfortunately, called SUDEP, and showing that it could very well be autonomic activation, extreme sympathetic activation in arrhythmias that is the cause of death. But to my knowledge, there's no research on POTS and epilepsy. I mean, I think a fair amount of patients have non-epileptic seizures, which is a whole nother topic and lecture, and talking about functional, and a lot of those patients are dismissed as it being psychosomatic, but we're realizing that is actually a disease. Probably it's just not a classic structural disease, it's a disease of the function, and they're non-epileptic seizures. But we're just listening to a podcast the other day where they're finding that patients with non-epileptic seizures actually have greater risk of death from not just their non-epileptic seizures, but everything else. And so I think non-epileptic seizures are.
Oh, sorry.
Dr. Those may be common in POTS, but I don't know about true seizures.
Dr. Sheldon, who's an EP that is a syncope expert at University of Calgary, has at prior conferences has lectured on the differences between syncope and pseudosyncope, and seizures and pseudo seizures or non-epileptic seizures. And it was a really great explanation of all these different categories of things. And it's on our autonomic disorders video library if anyone's interested, which is vimeo.com/dysautonomia. So let me take a few more questions here in the time we have left. So in terms of keep a lot of questions about the IVIG trial. In terms of the IVIG trial, can you kind of explain to people, it's meant to be like it's a pilot study, it's small, and where does it lead to? If it showed some efficacy, what's the next step?
So two things. One is, you have to kind of balance out how many patients you would want to have in a study to have enough what they call power statistically to make a judgment. So we were shooting for 20 patients in the trial. That should give enough power if there was a significant benefit for the POTS patients over the comparator, which is intravenous albumin. The reason for using albumin is that POTS is an infusion, like IV saline could potentially make people feel good just because they got an infusion plus the placebo effects of that. So we wanted to compare to something that would have an equal amount of protein and volume and everything else. So we're going to compare those two things. If it turns out that there statistically shows that there's a definite benefit of one over the other, that IVIG is superior to albumin by itself, that's a phase 3 trial. It's double blind, it's controlled. The doctors and the patients don't know what they got. So just in and of itself, that would be a study you could present to your doctor, to your insurance company, and say, here's class 1 evidence that this stuff works. Probably not enough to get an FDA indication, which usually requires several large trials of different study design. But it would be a big step forward as opposed to what we have now, which is pretty convincing case reports, but they are open label, and so everyone knows what drug was given and when it was given and so on. So that's the ultimate goal. That it could end up being that we see that this looks pretty good, doesn't quite meet all the really outstanding statistical criteria, and would then be the impetus for a larger study, probably with NIH funding, because we'd have pilot data to show that this is really feasible. To A, the study's feasible, and B, that it looks like it works. We just would need more patients, and that would be a second trial, which probably need multiple centers to get it done. So in a sense, it's a pilot study, but obviously we hope to have it work out that we see a effect that's big enough that we can report about it.
Yeah, a lot of the studies we funded are meant to be the studies that capture the early data, the conceptual data, that then that data can be taken to another larger funding source like the NIH, where you say, okay, well, Dysautonomia International gave us 200,000 and we did these 10 patients, and now we need $3 million and we're going to go to the NIH and ask for more money. So I think it's important that our audience kind of understands that, even though we're funding a lot of research, it's not the millions and millions and millions of dollars that we need to really move this forward. And that's why the advocacy piece is so important. Dr. Vernino, what we had put in the letter from all the experts, which all 4 of us are actually signed on to that letter, right? I think we had asked for $10 million a year for POTS funding, knowing we're probably not going to get $10 million a year. We're getting under $2 million a year on average right now. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less. And one of the things that the NIH says in response when we make the complaint that we're not getting enough is they say, well, there's not enough good research applications coming, because they don't want to fund just any research. They want to fund like high quality, well-designed studies. So what can we do to get more people doing good research grant applications to NIH?
Can I make a first comment? As someone who's applied multiple times for NIH funding and have been consistently told, one of the problems is I'm a gastroenterologist and I'm applying to study a neurological disease. They don't get that at all. And then, I'm always told to take it to a different program. So if it's not, NIDDK, they want me to go to NINDS and they say, well, you're a gastroenterologist, you can't be here. You know what I mean? So it's, again, the problems that we're running into with clinical medicine with these silos, we're running into as well with research funding.
Yeah.
I think what was amazing about what Lauren facilitated with this, helped to facilitate with Congress and the NIH was this workshop was jointly, I think it's not unimportant that it was jointly sponsored by the NHLBI and NINDS. And there were actually a couple other institutes sort of peripherally represented there too, which was really amazing, I think, as a good start. But Laura's right. And, I've also had you have 2 problems with NIH. They like to fund research that they know is going to work out and be good. So you have to have some pilot data. But how do you get the pilot data? So you need some way to get that. I think the best grants most likely get funded are the ones where you've already pretty much done the work and you know what the results are going to be. And that's unfortunate, but they like the sure thing. They like to fund the sure thing. So the groundbreaking research happens before the NIH funds it. That's kind of the stage we're at now. I hope that we're just on the cusp of starting to have projects that are really attractive in terms of their ability to get funded at the national level.
Yeah. So any advice though on like how we get more people to submit those good NIH applications? Because that's super hard to hear. I mean, I know like there are people who have applied, but I've heard that refrain from NIH so many times that they're not getting that many POTS applications. And these applications are hard to put together, right? It's a huge time sink for a researcher to put together a solid application. And like you said, you're going to have the work done already. So, any advice for our organization or our community on how do we get more people submitting these like even if we got Congress to put the money there, are we going to have enough people coming up with really brilliant ideas that need to be funded?
I'd say if you want to take this to the next level, we might, and I'm just thinking about this now, Lauren, maybe we convene another workshop where our purpose is to basically come up with grant ideas, write the specific aims, and then decide around the table who's going to write the grant, and we together get those things going. Just that's I think people need a little impetus, and that can sometimes.
All right, you're the chair of the meeting. It's happening next month.
I already chaired a meeting. I think Laura's in charge of the next one.
I'm game.
We're really incredibly lucky that we have so many clinicians that are willing to work with Dysautonomia International and come to our meetings and come to our lectures and do webinars. And it's a lot of work, and you don't get paid for this, and we really appreciate it. And I do think, but the worst thing about COVID and missing the in-person meeting is that we aren't having that research meeting this year. But I did actually talk to some of the other speakers previously a few days ago that we should probably have some virtual version of that private researcher meeting. And in terms of patients, always think, well, what's going on in that research meeting? It's not really that exciting. Sometimes the doctors argue with each other, which is kind of fun to see, but it's mostly, boring planning logistics kind of stuff. Like how are we going, who's going to do this, and how many people have to be enrolled, and how much funding does DI have to raise to pay for this? So, but anyways, I think that, we have a lot of work to do in research, and I appreciate all of you helping out with that, in the different ways that you do. What do we think in terms of trying to get, can you explain to one of you explain to our audience, what does it take to go from a research idea to getting the research done, publishing, getting it out? How long does that take? Because I don't think people have a realistic expectation of how much work actually goes into that. Mitch, you want to, since you write for one of the autonomic journals.
I write reviews of research. I wouldn't say that I'm doing that research. I mean, look, I think, at least for me, it's, I'm pretty much a full-time clinician, and I have no protected time for research. So all of my research is my free time. And, so a lot of the studies we do, we're starting with retrospective studies of, patients we've already seen. We're trying to get funding for more prospective things. And then we do what we can on the side. I mean, I think a big push at our institution is trying to get funding from private donors, just because we don't have the time to write grants full time. So it's just you do what you can, and you start with whatever you can, and that's
yeah.
What we do.
When you guys ask us for funding, we do require a grant application, but it's because we started receiving so many requests for funding that it became harder to pick what we were funding, which is a good problem to have. The more applications you have, the better the quality of the research is that you're going to be able to fund. But we try to make that grant application process not such a nightmare, because we know that we'd rather have you doing research than filling out applications. If anyone is listening that has sort of a background in research, in medical research in particular, we're always looking for patient and caregiver reviewers and clinician reviewers to help us review our grant applications. And we actually have a grant cycle happening right now, which Dr. Miglis actually applied for 2 grants under. I can't announce on the air. We have decisions that I have to email out tomorrow after the conference to our research applicants. And it's a long process even to gather we do a letter of intent, which is like a brief little letter that explains what the researcher wants to do and how much money they want. And then we have people review that, and then we get back to them, and then the researcher has to prepare the application, and then they send it in and we get it reviewed again. And the second stage review is usually 3 to 6 people reviewing the application and scoring it. And that's really important that we do that, so that we're intentionally funding the best research, not just funding the doctor we like the most, or, the kind of sexy new research idea. It has to be really solid research design to get meaningful results that can be published and make an impact. So that's what we're always looking for reviewers to help with. So if you're interested, you can email research@dysautonomiainternational.org. So anything else? We've got like 5 minutes left. Any closing thoughts?
Well, I just want to echo what Mitch said, and really, we're all busy working clinically, and as the sort of financial pressures are coming down on us, our institutions are less likely to protect our time, right? And so funding to protect a clinician's time is huge, because not only does that allow them to sort of read orthogonally and come up with creative ideas, it allows them to actually do the research that they set out to do. So that this is why things take so long, right? Like even when we have data, it takes so long to even write it up, because we're doing it, on our nights and on our weekends, because we're full-time clinicians.
Any closing thoughts from Dr. Meglis or Dr. Vernino?
I want to say, Steve, one thing you didn't mention was the, hopefully soon we'll have publication, reviewing some of this on research priorities and the future of POTS. And I don't think there's anything out there in the literature, that can be helpful to show the funding sources, what is needed. We can reference that in the literature and going forward, what the priorities are. So we're working on that.
Even time to write those review articles is very precious.
Do you want to give us an update on the status of the NIH POTS workshop minority report?
Yeah, right. That's a good, we should name it that. I think we decided ultimately we'd have to put this in 2 manuscripts because there was enough information there. And the first one is, I think, just about made its way around all the reviews, but I think we'd like to submit them as a set. So Dr. Raj and I have done the first edits on the second manuscript, which should make it around to the other authors here shortly. So we're getting there. It's always hard to synthesize down all of that into something that people will read and digest without leaving anything out. Obviously, everyone has their own. One of the challenges is everyone has their own sort of pet project or priority, and we want to give them all balanced weight. So appreciate everyone's input.
Yeah, well, it was pretty cool seeing all of you sitting at that table at the NIH and just knowing that, that is hopefully the first of many meetings with the NIH to kind of bolster this field and get more attention from the government in how to, how much funding. And research is it's slow. It's like a trickle. There's this little drip of information and then you build on that and you build something else. And we're still kind of at the infancy in understanding, particularly in understanding POTS. If you think about the research that's been done, a lot of it was sort of, I would call it like macro research, where we looked at blood flow and a little bit of nerve function, but just very recently started looking at genetics and antibodies and receptors and stuff like that. So that's a whole new way of doing research that this field is maybe a little slow to apply to this disease. And I'm excited though, because now we're here and we can only move forward. Hopefully we can't go backwards. That's the rule.
But ultimately, I think the challenge is going to be integrating all of that together. It's like the analogy of the elephant, and we're each grabbing onto a part of it. Trying to figure out how to bring that all together and characterize POTS patients, not just using the tools that we have, but the tools that are available from all of our different experts.
Yeah. Someone is saying, pay the researchers. Well, yes, we would love to. We try our best in raising funds to pay them. So, well, thank you guys all so much for all the work you do for these patients and for your time tonight. Thank you.